Well, good morning, stargazers. Not sure where you are on the planet right now, but where I'm at, it's 7 in the morning. And I've been awake for a little while, getting up at 3 in the morning a lot these last couple days. So we're feeling the effects of the eclipse. So some general rules about an eclipse is that you are, as a general rule, expected to feel it about 10 days before and 3 days after. The effects with the cycle that's kicked in with the eclipse goes on for 6 months. Now, while this is happening, of course, there are other eclipses occurring at the same time. If my eyes appear red, I apologize. I'm literally, I'm on an insomniac sleep cycle this week. So we are heading into the December 14th new moon eclipse at 23 Sag. This is a Jupiter-ruled eclipse, and more notoriously, it is setting up a T-square to Neptune. So, so in fairness, there are reasons to be concerned, because, you know, one of the challenges with outer planets is that unless you're actively, diligently, and conscientiously working towards its highest expression, or you just happen to be involved in activities that are expressions of its highest form, you're by default going to sink to the lowest expression of the planet. It's just, to become like angels and gods requires more work than just lip service. So with Neptune, people who are artists, musicians, creative people who are in service, health service, medical service, social service, community service, people who are advocates and champions for the underdogs, people who are caretakers, people who do all the high-level positive expression of Neptune are going to be fine with this eclipse, and we're actually going to get a lot of benefit from it. For the rest of you out there, you know, whose most consistent expression of Neptune is escaping through, you know, television and alcohol and gossip. Well, I hate to break it to you, Chuchi Pie, but this is not going to be the best and easiest eclipse you've ever had in your life. Just saying. It's never too late to try and be a better person. Okay, so on to the thing. So we're going to do this. We're going to do this report a little bit differently. So first thing, grab your pencil, grab your calendar. I want you to mark some dates down. I'm going to tell you which dates to watch. Then I'm going to, if you want, you can stick around and explain why. All right. So first thing, the dates we want to watch obviously is December 14th when the eclipse occurs. Now, circle that date, and then I want you to jump forward to January 3rd, 2021. Oh, sorry, December 31st, and then January 3rd, 2021. Under December 31st, I want you to make a note, December 14th, or the December eclipse, and on January 3rd, 2021, I also want you to mark December 14th or the December eclipse, because all of these things are connected. And now we're going to talk about why this is important. All right, so when looking at this eclipse, I mean, the obvious thing here is that we've got, so when looking at this eclipse, the obvious thing we've got going on here is the T-square within, well, I don't know. I mean, the nodes are important, but I'm not using them here. The most important thing that we're seeing is a square to Neptune, a very tight square. Neptune, God bless. I love Neptune. I really do. But it can be problematic and challenging because most people aren't even making the effort to reach those Neptunian levels. This last 4 years are a classic example of the two sides of Neptune, right? So Rumpus Room, who's been in charge of the administration these last 4 years, is, I don't care what anybody says, damn it, he is Virgo rising. He's like 0 or 1 degree Virgo rising. And that Virgo means that he is in his chart, Mercury is his chart ruler, and Mercury squares his Neptune. Okay? So Mercury Neptune square rules his chart and gives us a strong thumbprint of his identity. And if we haven't seen that, Mercury Neptune square, by the way, is also one of the indications of somebody who's got a very generous, loose relationship with the truth. Okay. And this is different from Jupiter. Jupiter also can be a little liberal in their applications of embellishment with the truth. But with Neptune, I mean, literally, you're on your own little fantasy island most of the time, which is great if you're an artist or a musician, you know, or somebody who works in the healing arts or, you know, is doing something out of, you know, for service. But when you're involved in like the nuts and bolts of daily living and the, you know, the bump and grind of dealing with the here and now, Neptune and being on your own little fantasy island all the time is not a good thing, as we've seen. Guys, it's his island and we're all just servants in it. All right. Jupiter, on the other hand, will embellish like a salesman. They'll make things much bigger than they are, and you know, they kind of leave out a few details here and there. Both of them, Jupiter and Neptune, are well-intentioned in their mind. They're very well-intentioned. But ultimately, the character of a person, which we cannot define by a chart, the character of a person, the real character of a person, and their integrity levels and their baseline standards or principles, that's the thing that will determine or define how they express this, right? So, Neptune squaring this eclipse is going to make things a little murky. A little murky. I'm not going to lie. It's going to make things a little murky. But when we look at this chart, and we've got so much stuff going on this week, that this makes this particular eclipse very eventful. And remember, astrology is about combinations of things. It's not little cookbook piecemeal, you know, Venus in Aries in the first means this, and that's clearly why. That's not how it works. So it's like baking a cake. Listen, you can talk all you want about the eggs in a cake recipe or the butter or the flour, but at the end of the day, it's not the individual items and the quantities of those items, right? It's not about that. It's about the combination of those things, including the oven that you're putting it in, the circumstances that you put this thing in, and the temperature setting you put it on, meaning the stress levels that is activating this combination of things to start gelling together to become a cohesive unit working as a team in its expression, which turns out a cake. Not just a generic cake, a specific kind of cake, which is different from the other one, depending on the other variations of ingredients and circumstances that you find itself in. And that is how astrology works. And that's why astrology is not as easy to learn as it seems. And if you're getting frustrated and overwhelmed, this is why, because it's not just A plus B equals C. So when we look at this eclipse, one of the things that we know is that this particular eclipse chart has other things in it we need to examine. And this is pretty interesting. So the first thing I noticed is that Venus is quincunxing Mars. Venus is in Scorpio in the late degrees. Oh my God. And it's squaring Mars in Aries, which is in its natural sign of rulership. This is more problematic than the eclipse squaring Neptune. And here's why. With Venus and Scorpio squaring Mars in Aries, what you have is the equivalent, like this is in an individual chart, this is a really uncomfortable, not great placement, because Venus in Scorpio square Mars in Aries is very much about power and control in relationships, and it's all about domination and vengeance and vindictiveness and the great I am, and don't you forget it. Like that's what you get with that quincunx. So when this Venus-Mars quincunx gets activated in individuals, oftentimes what you'll get are responses from them where if you're not taking them seriously enough, it's literally what they call that scorched earth theory. They will burn the house down. Oh no, I will burn the house down just to prove a point, and you will never do this again. Right? So if you know somebody with this aspect, you're pretty personally familiar with how this works. So you know, these people, man, don't flip that switch. With this eclipse, it's the same overreaction to not being taken seriously about things that other people thought was not that serious. So this is a really very important time to pay attention to those little warning signs, right? So even though you don't think it's a big deal, you have to look at it for the next 14 days, like 3 days after the eclipse, so out to the 17th, after the end of that week, right? You have to look at things through other people's eyes, not the way you see it, but the way they see it, because you may accidentally step on the tail of the tiger and not realize what you've done. And then, you know, literally then you'll unleash the Kraken And with the eclipse involving Neptune, this is going to blow everything way out of proportion. So not only is it going to obscure it, so it's not obvious when you're walking up to it, but when the response reaction occurs, it's going to be larger than life, right? And remember, these eclipse cycles go on for about 6 months. So you may not see the response immediately, but it's a coming. It's a coming. So there's that. Then also too, I was looking at, so let's look at the planetary patterns in this eclipse chart that we're getting, right? So the eclipse itself is in a Leo decan and a Virgo duad. So we've got some Virgo energy going on here. The Capricorn planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, which are in a novile aspect with that eclipse, are Jupiter and Saturn are also in a Sagittarius duad. Mars, which is also involved with this eclipse, is in a Sagittarius decan and a Sagittarius duad. And then, of course, there's the others we'll get into in a second. Now, you're listening that you're like, okay, well, okay, right? So a decan is the segments of the zodiac broken down into smaller, tighter sub-segments, right? Which have different astrological rulerships. So, because we're refining, right? We're giving each like distinct flavors. This is why twins born minutes apart have distinctly different personalities. Even though the charts are nearly identical, they're only separated by a minute or two. Those decans and duads that are different between the twins have everything to do with coloring the chart and the planets being represented. So that couple of minutes between identical twins will also give you if those decans and duads are different, will give you very different personalities, right? So same thing, that's why we're kind of like, we're trying to refine this to find very specific things. Now, with this Mars in a Sagittarius decan and the Sagittarius duad, which is very exceptional, right? Very exceptional, like literally the point of a needle. It's concerning. I find this concerning. And the reason I find this concerning is that Sagittarius rules military. It also rules the police and law enforcement and the law, which, the police and law enforcement the military and the police are the same thing. The difference is whether it's foreign or domestic. So our military on domestic soil we call the police. Military on foreign soil, we call it the military. Or the police on foreign soil, we call it military. Those Mars in Sagittarius emphasizes this a lot. And Sagittarius also rules international affairs and foreign relations and people at a distance. So this has a much more global connection than other aspects in a chart normally, or that we've had for a while. So with that said, this Mars, remember, this Mars squares those Capricorn planets. And we've got Saturn at the end of its sign. Saturn is literally at the 29th degree X minutes when this eclipse occurs. So literally at the end of someone's rope, as it were. With Mars squaring that, it's a very frustrating, very high tension, high pressure sort of aspect. And this is when the eclipse is occurring. So, and with Neptune involved, right? This hypersensitivity. So there's a lot of that. There is the distinct possibility, and this is why it's so important that we pay attention to what policymakers are doing. And remember, when we say policymaker, we're saying politician. That's what a politician is. They are a policy maker. Don't get it twisted. So if you're not paying attention to politics and your politicians that you're voting for, or not doing any voting at all, right? What you're really saying is, I don't care who's making the policies that will affect me and my life. Let them make the rules. I'll play by whatever they decide. That's literally what it is. Politician equals policy maker. And if you're not paying attention and participating in that process, you're basically saying that someone else has all kinds of rights and liberty to make any kind of rules they want for you. And maybe not them, because they can exclude themselves from those things because they are the policy makers. So there is the distinct possibility that there are people in positions of policy making across the globe that may be gearing up, or as a result of circumstances and events around this time, may be gearing up for some type of aggressive, militarized action, okay, that is absolutely about power and control and hurt feelings, like being all kinds of butthurt. Now, for those of you who live in the U.S., this may not be us. This may not be us. We might get through this without the Senate sending our children into war. But the thing to remember, if you've been paying attention, is we're also in a very weakened state. The lion has been wounded, and now is the time for the jackals to move in. So there's a lot more going on here that we're not necessarily seeing or hearing or being consciously aware of, because we're so busy watching literally the insanity that our administration has become, like the global embarrassment and insanity that the administration has become. Literally, it's like watching a car crash, like in slow motion. So you don't see everything else whizzing by you, you know, as people are, you know, taking off with your belongings of your house. Okay. So that is a distinct possibility. We need to pay attention. We need to be very involved in this so we can prevent this from happening. Come January 3rd, or I'm sorry, come December 31st, this eclipse is going to get activated. So I would look for some activity on December 1st and also again on January 3rd, but specifically December 31st. I would look for activity on December 31st and January 3rd that are direct byproducts of things coming from or through this eclipse. All right. So watch what happens on the 14th, and also watch what happens on the 31st and the 3rd, because we've got 6 months to play this out. So this is a big deal. Now, so those are your 2 important days. The other thing, just as a friendly warning, and then we're going to get into some happier stuff about this eclipse. Some other things about this eclipse. Oh, sorry. One more day. One more set of days. December 20th to 23rd. December 20th to 23rd. So it's December 20th to 23rd, December 31st, and January 3rd. These are hot spots through the month that are related to this eclipse. Keep an eye on those. There is a very real possibility that we may have some much larger issues looming coming ahead. And, you know, for those of us here in the U.S. with the clown car posse running the administration into the ground as best they can before the next administration takes over, this is the last thing we want to hear, because there are a lot of people who are looking at being homeless this month and next month, you know, homeless, broke, like just bad, all the way around. And of course, you know, here, because of, you know, who we have in charge, not taking charge of anything, you know, except their, well, bowel movements, maybe, and handing out pardons like party favors. We also have coronavirus cases that are exploding, like astronomically, like beyond even reason, right? And the thing to remember, if you guys aren't aware of this, let me just remind you folks, the problem is not the coronavirus exploding and people getting sick with corona, because some people will survive coronavirus. Some people survive COVID-19. They'll have lifelong complications as a result of, but they could survive it. It's possible, right? And old people die from the flu. If, you know, it's not unthinkable they're going to die from COVID-19, right? We get that. We get that. The problem is that in a hospital, we have a limited number of ICU beds, right? Because it's not normal to have an ICU unit completely full unless there's been a mass plane crash, right? So we have a limited number of ICU beds, which represent maybe a tenth, a fifth, like 3% of all the available hospital beds in the unit. And remember, in an ICU unit, it's a completely different animal. It's literally the difference between a tricycle and an 18-wheeler. Like, there's a whole lot more going on in an ICU room, right, for a patient than in a regular hospital room. With that said, also, when you're in an ICU, it requires team care. It's not one nurse taking care of you. It's not like a regular hospital bed where a nurse comes in every 3 or 4 hours, hands you pills, checks you, and leaves. Not like that at all. Literally not like that at all. So a single ICU bed is going to take a dedicated nurse assigned to that, who will have a limit of maybe 2 or 3 patients, compared to a regular hospital bed where a nurse has the floor with the other nurses, but also has 5, 6, 8 beds assigned to her that she's got specific responsibilities. So she's either giving out the meds or doing something else or whatever. Like, she has a specific role, and she's got like multiple beds she's responsible for. In an ICU unit, the nurse is responsible for that patient exclusively, and the other patient and maybe the other. So 2 or 3 patients exclusively, all the care. And other things need to be done because there's so many tubes and wires and everything else going on. It's a team effort to do anything in that room with the patient. So if a patient has to be turned in bed, like you have to literally roll somebody over to their side, she can't do it by herself. Even in a regular hospital bed, you can't do that by yourself. To roll a patient to their side requires at minimum 2 people, typically 3. All right. And that's in a regular hospital bed without tubes and wires and everything else and sensors hanging off of you everywhere. In an ICU bed, you're looking at least 5 people. And it's going to take much longer because you've got to be careful not to pull things out of the body, right? Because it's ICU, not a regular hospital bed. So what this means, and also when you're in an ICU unit, you're typically there a lot longer than you're in a regular hospital bed, which means that once somebody gets parked you're literally parked in an ICU bed, you're going to be there a while. That bed is officially tied up for days, weeks, sometimes months. All right. So that removes that ICU bed from the limited number of beds they already started with. With COVID-19 and these exploding cases, they don't have the ability to say, oh, no, listen, I realize you got COVID-19, but we might have a car accident victim coming in the next hour or so. We're not really sure. So you're just going to have to wait until we're sure we don't have a real trauma patient that needs the bed urgently, that won't be in there forever. They can't do that. So it's first come, first serve in the hospital. So if you've got all of your ICU beds filled up with COVID patients, and COVID-19 you're not recovering from in a day, all right, you're looking at least a week, maybe 2, maybe 3, sometimes 4, a long damn time. That entire time, somebody else is not able to get that bed because you're in it, or somebody else is in it with COVID. Which means that if your husband, your son, your daughter, if they're in a car accident and all those ICU beds are filled with COVID patients, guess where they're not going? They're not going to an ICU bed. We can't throw people out of ICU beds to make room for the trauma patient. Okay? If you accidentally chop your leg off with a chainsaw because you're out there working in the back trying to get trees down, you're not going to the ICU. Like you have a heart attack, right? There's all these other people who come down with acute traumatic injury that need ICU just as urgently as a COVID patient that will now not have access to those ICU beds for who knows how long, because COVID does not go away instantly. All right. And that's every day. That's that many more people who are denied hospital beds in the ICU unit that need it because there's no place to put them. You can't just fabricate an ICU room. There's a lot of specialized equipment and monitors specific to ICU that's not anywhere else in the hospital. We can't just automatically make an ICU room. It doesn't work like that. So with COVID cases skyrocketing through the country, this means that all those ICU beds are being filled up with COVID patients because we can't turn them away. It's not right. But at the same time, while they are in those beds, there's a lot of other people every day that go to the hospital that have significant trauma that need those ICU beds that are no longer going to have access to them. And that's where all the deaths are going to come from. It's not going to be the deaths because of the COVID. It's going to be the unnecessary deaths because of the trauma and the inability to get these people in an ICU unit where they need to be because we have no beds. That is a problem. So, with that said, now I know they've come out with a vaccine, and the vaccine right now technically is coming under the eclipse. We are under the shadow of the eclipse because it's within that 10-day window before the eclipse. So, and Neptune's involved with the eclipse. So there is the distinct possibility that there may be some weird stuff happening as a result of these eclipses that nobody could have prepared for. And this is because it came out in such a hurry. We're in such a damn rush to get this vaccine out because this pandemic is so badly managed. We haven't had a chance to do as thorough a testing and examination as we need to, which requires, ta-da, time, which we've not given it. So be prepared for some weird and unexpected things to come up as a result of the eclipse, and do not blame the drug manufacturers, and do not blame the scientists, and do not blame the doctors for this, because in order to thoroughly drug test, you need time, which we have not given anybody, except COVID. We've given COVID-19 plenty of time. So now that I've just depressed the living daylights out of you, Here's the good news. Here's the good news. All right, so with this eclipse, some important things you should know about this eclipse. This eclipse with novile between the eclipse and Jupiter, Saturn, with Saturn at those last degrees. Remember I said Saturn in those last degrees, there's a lot of urgency here. This is literally the last chance to board that train, and that's it. So once we makes the switch over, we're done. Train's left the station, you can never go back and redo a decision. With this novile, this also gives us a couple of clues. One, there's a lot of divine intervention involved in here. So make no mistake about it, there's a much bigger plan and a much bigger force specific to things that occur now under this eclipse, right? And also within the shadow, but definitely under the eclipse and these eclipse dates that I gave you. The other thing is that the novile has a lot to do with sacrifice and service. So it's like the Mother Teresa of aspects. There are other things with the novile as well. Now, it's considered a minor aspect, which means it's not used very often because, again, you know, these things, it's combinations of things, right? There are some things that are going to be more dominant themes in a chart than, you know, a single hidden novile in there somewhere or a minor aspect. But in this particular case, because it does involve the eclipse, it does involve that 29-degree Saturn in rulership in Capricorn. This is big stuff. So when it comes to people who are committed to doing charitable work and doing the right thing and being of service to the humanity at large, there's a lot of protection here. And there's a lot of people being called spiritually or instinctively, you know, to do better, to do better. Selfishness is going to get a spanking like nobody's business right now. So if you are one of those people who's trying to do the right thing and, you know, like myself and many other people are just up to here with people and their selfishness and their self-absorbed behavior, to the point that you're like ready to say, I hate people, I hate people, I hate people, I hate people, let them all die. Like they're stupid and they're selfish, let them all die. Let's start all over again. If you've gotten to that point because you've been trying to do the right thing and it's doesn't seem to be helping, have faith, take comfort in the fact that the goddess is coming in and the angels are stepping in. There's a lot of divine intervention happening with this eclipse and the eclipse activation dates. So hang in there, take some time out for you, keep the faith, you know, progress is messy. Progress is messy. As anybody who's ever had a child go through puberty, progress is messy.